On today's show, we're breaking down the biggest risers and fallers from the USHL over the past month, highlighted by Bruno Idžan's clever goal scoring.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we're going to be breaking down my neck of the woods, the USHL, focusing in on the biggest risers and fallers from the past month, highlighted by almost exclusively first-time draft-eligible talents. There's one D+1 player in here, but he hasn't been picked yet, and he is the highlight of today's show. And that's Bruno Idžan of the Lincoln Stars, who's going to be our focus in the first segment. In the second segment, we're going to be zeroing in on the NTDP, who have been led offensively by McKinney and Mooney over recent weeks. And those are two players that have definitely been risers in my own draft rankings in that span of time. And then in the final segment, we'll be wrapping up the show by discussing Jacob Rombach, whose steady play has left him a very consistent second-round talent this season, whereas Teddy Mutryn of the Chicago Steel has been a little bit of a faller, but he hasn't been helped by a lack of support around him there with the Steel. But that's today's show, but let's just jump straight into it in the first segment here, because Bruno Idžan is a fascinating case. This is a player who's been scoring at a wicked rate ever since transferring to the USHL from the Alps Hockey League, where he was playing this season. He was playing alongside one of Daniel Briere's sons there, Carson Briere. And he scored 21 goals and 30 points in 19 games there this year. It was his first full professional campaign, and it's really been his first look at professional hockey. But he then chose to pull the trigger on a switch to the USHL, as he's also a University of Wisconsin commit for 2026-27. Probably will already be making that jump next year. But ever since transferring to the Lincoln Stars, who have been the best team in the entire USHL, over the course of the entire season, but more specifically as well, in the past 2 months, they have been utterly dominant at this level, and Idžan's arrival has played a big role in that, and he's scored 19 goals and 37 points in 26 games since arriving, and that goal scoring hasn't come from necessarily having a blistering shot. Overall, I think the tools could still use some real work. The skating is pretty funky. The motor and the stamina definitely need an overhaul before he can make a leap to the AHL or the NHL level. And he's going to need at least another 3 or 4 seasons, in my eyes, to become an NHL level player in terms of the physicality and the energy. Certainly two elements that have been a bit more difficult in his adaptation now to the USHL, but still he sits second league-wide in points per game. He's been neck and neck with Will Zellers ever since arriving in terms of points per game this season, and he's well above third place, which is Riker Lee of the Madison Capitals, who's at 1.22, but Idžan and Zellers are at 1.42 and 1.43 respectively. Definitely the two highest rate scorers in the league this season, but the way that Idžan scores his goals is fascinating. On the one hand, it's just been dominant at the USHL level because he's an incredibly opportunistic goal scorer. He has excellent anticipation, takes varied and dynamic off-puck routes, constantly is losing defensive coverage and falling into defenders' blind spots, and exploring the gaps between checks. So he's been making lives very difficult for USHL defenders this season through his intelligence and his positioning off puck, rather than through quick feet or dynamism or a really intense motor, because he really lacks all those qualities at this level this season. But he's just constantly in the right place at the right time around the goal mouth where he arrives right when the puck breaks free. The sense of timing has really been a big strength in this game, but definitely still some area to grow in terms of the checking habits, the intensity. I've only caught maybe a handful of really high intensity shifts this season, and they all came at pretty random points in the middle of games where I thought it was quite clear that his coaches told him to up the motor a little bit, and he did for a shift, but then fell back to his habits thereafter. So a player that definitely still has to put in some work in the gym, but still, I think that the intelligence and just the intuition on the ice in the offensive zone has been a very special part of his game this season that is very difficult to teach. So certainly reasons to invest a draft selection in this player with that basis. I think if everything goes well in his development and he's really able to improve that intensity, the stamina, the physicality, and the skating mechanics, then his cerebral connective playmaking and his off-puck goal-scoring habits could lead him to his third-line winger role in the NHL someday. But a lot still has to go right in order for him to fulfill that kind of upside, in my view. So definitely an intriguing case, but not a player that I would personally feel comfortable investing a top 100 draft selection in at this point, despite the really high-level production for a 19-year-old here in the USHL. Also has to be noted that I think that Idžan is exactly what the Lincoln Stars lacked in their team previous to his arrival, and he's been just the perfect complementary top six piece because that is his game in Lincoln. He's a complementary piece. He's not the focal point of the attack. He's a player that arrives at the right time to finish a chance. He's a player that is able to be like the connective piece in a give and go for a more dynamic, quicker skating line mate to just pounce him up the ice. He's been a facilitator more than anything with his off puck play. And I think that that's something that he's going to still have to grow out of to an extent in order to diversify his impact rather than just being very much a specialist at this point in Lincoln in terms of being that high IQ forward with a very fluid role in the offensive zone without as much responsibility in terms of checking, often being the F3 in offensive situations, and just being able to exploit little gaps, little pockets that he's able to locate to find on the ice. So a player that I think has thrived in that kind of fluid role in Lincoln, a team that's been playing some very structured but intense and middle driven hockey this season. So he's been just the perfect piece there. So his scoring, I think, also reflects that specific element. So a player whose production may raise some arguments in terms of top 64 draft selection possibility among fans of the game who are tracking the draft class. I think that with how he plays the game and specifically the lack of intensity, I would still be a little bit cautious and skeptical of investing that high value of a pick, even with his level of production. I mean, Lincoln had a 9-1-0 record over the month of February, but Bruno Idžan in those 10 games had 11 goals and 18 points. So he's been very involved in Lincoln's winning streak, but he's also been benefiting from everything that's making Lincoln very good, while also falling into exactly the niche that Lincoln was needing in terms of a connective piece in that top six who just finds himself in the right areas at the right time. But he hasn't been scoring through high level tools. The playmaking is probably the best of the bunch, maybe a 5.5 grade on our EP grade ranking scale. But overall, still a player that has to do some more work on the tool side of things, but has elements on the brain side of things, the decision making, the intuition on the ice, and just feeling comfortable and understanding both his team structure and defensive habits in order to exploit little gaps. There's a lot to like in this player, and a very interesting player for me to watch because while he leaves me frustrated at times as a scout with the lack of engagement and intensity, the intelligence far exceeds the average at the USHL level, making really high-end reads that I think are going to really help him adapt to the NCAA level and also compensate for some of these physical lackings while making that jump to the NCAA pace of play. So a player that I definitely think we should be keeping our eyes on in the next couple of seasons, and I'll be fascinated to see if a team ends up selecting him at the 2025 NHL draft, and if so, where it is that he'll land. Because if he's able to get paired with a really good skating coach and conditioning coach, there's a lot to like with the upside on this player. But that wraps up the first segment here for us today. In the next one, we'll be talking NTDP with Cole McKinney, the two-way centerman who's just been leading the charge at both ends of the ice this year for the program, as well as LJ Mooney, who's been exploring the dynamism and playmaking elements of his game since returning from injury back in December. All that and a lot more coming up after these messages from our sponsors. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab and go snacks that keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I recently tried their Protein Plus meals and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the day. The convenience is just unbeatable. No prep, no mess, and great food in just minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, looking at the NTDP, who have been playing some better hockey as of late. They're on a pretty big winning streak here, having won their last 8 games split between the U18 Five Nations tournament and the USHL, beating teams, very strong teams like Dubuque and Green Bay and the Madison Capitals now over the past couple of weeks. They've been ramping up their play, and 2 players in my viewings have been really integral pieces of this recent surge for the USNTDP that has lacked a superstar to build around this season. There's no James Higgins level talent, but there are reliable pieces, and Cole McKinney is a reliable player to his core. He's a 6-foot, 198-pound right shot center who has been playing first-line center minutes for the NTDP all season long, winning key draws, playing a lot of defensive minutes, playing on the penalty kill, playing on the power play in a bumper roll. He has a good shot, good release, but it's not the tools that make him special. He's a very physically involved player who is able to create space and time for his line mates and make their lives easier. He's a very effective F1 on the forecheck, a player that is also able to make really deft little one-touch plays in transition to connect between perhaps more dynamic line mates. He's been playing mainly with Richard Gallant and Jack Murtagh this season. Murtagh is certainly more dynamic, more creative than Cole McKinney is, and Richard Gallant has a better playmaking touch than McKinney does, but still with McKinney's physical tools, the defensive habits, the ability to win draws, and also the opportunistic goal scoring, just getting to the net front, getting to the dirty areas, being very middle driven with his play and connecting between his wingers. I think there's a lot to like with this player, and a guy that I see as a real top 50 talent in this draft class. That's mainly where he's been ranked. He's up at 22nd at Dauber Prospects. At Elite Prospects, he's at number 59. I haven't been able to push him up into the top 50 just yet, but I think I will try to make a push at our next ranking meeting. I'll still get a couple more viewings in on McKinney between now and then, so we'll see how those go. But his scoring recently has been excellent. 8 goals and 16 points in his last 10 games. Just in his last 5 against those strong USHL opponents, he has 4 goals and 8 points as well in those wins, solidifying things down the middle for the NTDP. I don't think there's all that much offensive upside with this player, but I do believe that NHL teams will gravitate towards him a little like they did towards a guy like Colt Baudouin last season in terms of being able to win draws, play effective bottom 6 minutes, being very projectable to the modern NHL game. And while he is a bit north-south, a bit linear, and lacks some creativity and just high-end separating offensive tools, this is a player that I think will be playing minutes in the NHL within the next 3 to 4 years. He's intelligent, he works hard, he's physical. The runway is certainly a question mark, I think, because he's pretty much filled out his frame. I don't think he's going to gain all that much more weight than he's at right now. So perhaps the developmental runway is a question mark still, but with how reliable he's been, with how big of a state he's been playing on all season, being the biggest minute muncher among NTDP forwards this year, I think that an NHL team is going to take a swing on him, likely in the first round, and if not in the top 40, because there's just, again, a lot to like, and he's been surging recently, and he hasn't even turned 18 yet at the time of recording. His birthday is March 16th, so still 4 days off here from the point that I am filming this. But Cole McKinney is certainly a player I think that is raising up the stock. So along with Bruno Idžan, I think that Cole McKinney has definitely been a riser in the USHL over recent months. And next up, we have another NTDP riser over the recent stretch, and that's L.J. Mooney. Little John Mooney, the 5'7", 157-pound right shot center / right wing. He's been playing a lot down the middle recently here for the NTDP and has been excellent in that last 5 games against USHL competition, having two 3-point games against the Madison Capitals and the Green Bay Gamblers, also scoring a pair of assists in a 4-3 shootout victory over Dubuque. So he's been very involved in his team's offense, but what has been so evident in my viewings and what's been growing in his game is, well, he's the highest motor player on the ice every single time he steps foot on the ice. I think he might be the highest motor player in the entire 2025 NHL draft class. I think Carter Bear is certainly a contender in there. Victor Eklund maybe, but LJ Mooney outworks everybody night in, night out. And beyond that, what he's been really surging into in recent months has been dynamic, middle-driven playmaking. He's growing habits in terms of reloading in the offensive zone when he finds a little bit of space and then just attacking downhill, down the jugular, towards the middle of the ice, and just sending feeds into dangerous areas, being able to implement delays as well, hang on to the puck, be a shooting threat as well. He's been really dynamic in his middle drives in my recent viewings, and a player that definitely is going to have some skepticism at the NHL draft this year, and he's not a guarantee to be picked. I think there's a lot of teams that aren't going to be interested in him whatsoever on draft day. I do, however, believe that a team is going to take a swing on him in the late rounds, and that he's a player that could certainly raise up his stock once he plays in the NCAA, because with his pace, with his motor, his inside drive, and now the growing dynamic playmaking in his game with quick feet and a lot to like also in terms of defensive engagement, I think he's a guy whose stock could really, really boom in his D+1, D+2 seasons, despite being really undersized, and definitely has hurdles to overcome. But with how hard he works, I don't know if I want to bet against this player. I love how he plays the game. He's very fun to watch, and beyond just that, and beyond being the cousin of Logan Cooley, he's a player whose skill is developing and whose motor, I think, could elevate him to an NHL role where the skill could raise him even further up an NHL lineup. And I think also a player that has some second line upside who could be had late on day 2 of the draft. So certainly a player to keep your eyes on, and a player I'm going to keep watching intently, because not only is he fun to watch, but he's adding elements to his game every single time I tune in. And those are always very, very exciting to take note of. But that wraps up the second segment here for us. In the final one, we'll be talking about Jacob Rombach, who has been a steady stock player this season for the Lincoln Stars, just playing very reliable minutes there on the blue line, but whose scoring has increased a little bit in the back half of the season. And we'll also be discussing Teddy Mutryn, a heavy shot winger / center, 6'1", 207-pound guy, but who's been very inconsistent in terms of decision-making as well as consistent involvement this year. But we'll wrap up the show in the next segment. And first, a quick message from our sponsors. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell variety are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs the protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, kicking it off with Jacob Rombach, 6'6", 201-pound left shot defenseman, playing with the best team in the USHL this season, the Lincoln Stars, and he has been very, very solid for them in my viewings this campaign. Just with his mobility, his ability to match footwork off the rush, and just being incredibly rangy. The radius that he's able to cover defensively has been such an asset for Lincoln in terms of shepherding players just into the boards consistently. He's a very suffocating rush defender, and he's also been an excellent breakout passer in my viewings this season. And it's a thing that's made him really stand out from the pack among big physical defensemen who can defend the rush really effectively. He's able to then take the puck and do something with that possession pretty quickly, very effectively, and with a lot of composure. So he's very calm on retrievals, constantly shoulder checking with a good mental map of his surroundings, of the oncoming pressure, using his body while to shield possession, not afraid of initiating contact, bumping off an opponent in order to go the other way, in order to stop their momentum rather than panicking and forcing himself into uncomfortable positions. He's a player that doesn't find himself in uncomfortable positions all that often, and the offensive side of his game is certainly still a work in progress. There's been flashes of blossoming creativity and overall fluidity in his offensive plays, but overall a player that is most comfortable being a connective piece at the blue line. He's a decent enough passer that's able to launch the puck to either end in the offensive zone. He's also been implementing a bit more deception in his playmaking habits with lookoffs and head fakes. So certainly some growth on that side this season, but not a player that I think is expected to drive offense at any point in his professional career, but a guy that's going to be a specialist at turning over and retrieving and recycling possession, that can just make the lives easier of all the teammates that are on the ice with him because of how much space he's able to cover defensively with his stick and with his feet, as well as his ability to remain calm under pressure and solve even complex situations with a lot of composure. And these are NHL traits. There's still a lot to work on, I think, in terms of the transition habits when he's in motion and trying to become a fourth attacker. Those passing sequences certainly are a bit more disjointed at this stage, but he's a University of Minnesota commit, and I think that he's going to develop very nicely in that program, just focusing in on those defensive details, becoming a specialist on the penalty kill, and using his physicality to just completely clear the net front. Lincoln's goaltenders have had very clear sightlines this season with Jacob Rombach on the ice, and his ability to leverage his physicality proactively rather than taking himself out of the play with it has certainly been a positive element in his game. The stick handling isn't a strength at this stage, but I think that there's enough there to work with in order to become a problem solver on retrievals at the NHL level. And he has some upside as a second pairing defensive specialist that can also help the team in the breakout. But let's move on here to the final player on today's list. Today's episode is based on an article series that we have at Elite Prospects, diving into each of the junior regions of our NHL draft coverage and focusing on the biggest risers and fallers every single month. So this is for the USHL Stockwatch article for the month of February, which will of course be linked below. But the final player we're talking about here today is Teddy Mutryn of the Chicago Steel in the USHL, and he is the one faller in my article for this month. And it's been for a variety of reasons. This is a player whose physical frame and heavy shot have gotten a lot of scouts' attention this season. He's 6'1", 207 pounds, the right shot center / winger. He's mainly played on the wing in my viewings, and I think that's where he'll be most comfortable because he's a player that's found himself chasing the play so often in my viewings this season, and that's been my main concern. He finds himself behind a little bit on decision making. He chases what is rather than predicting what will be, and paired with some choppy skating mechanics, it's made him lag behind play a little bit at both ends of the ice, both defensively and offensively. And while his shot is certainly a plus level tool, 6.5 grade probably in my book, it's heavy, it's accurate, it's a threat to score from distance, and he could be a trigger man on a second power play in the NHL if everything goes to plan, if everything goes right in his development. And I think that the best way of getting to that level will be to forge himself as a goal scoring specialist with some power forward checking upside, because he is intense, he's hardworking, he's physical. There's a profile here, but the reading of the game, the anticipation and the intuition in the offensive zone, the off-puck habits to find soft ice down low, those are still things I think are weaknesses in his game, and that leaves me a little bit skeptical about the overall upside. He's also taking a lot of penalty minutes this season with 71 and 44 games. His frustrations come out in spurts there with some ill-timed minor penalties throughout the year in my viewings as well, but still a player that I think has real upside, and if he hits, could become a third line scorer with some second power play potential. But there's a really long road to get there. But he'll be moving on to Boston College in order to continue his development, and that's certainly a program where his goal scoring should flourish. I'll be curious to see how the pure goal scoring of Teddy Mutryn will compare to Cole Eiserman next season, because they might be playing similar bottom six sheltered goal scoring roles where they get power play minutes but are seeing more limited ice time at even strength. But still, Teddy Mutryn's going to see some NHL intrigue on draft day because of that profile, because of the strength. But I have some reservations, and he's been a faller in my personal valuation from my recent viewings for the reasons listed here. But it should be noted that he's not surrounded by the type of support that he needs. He's a guy that needs connective, dynamic playmakers that can carry the bulk of the transition workload in terms of rush attacking and puck carrying, where he can focus on off puck, middle driven routes, F1, forechecking, dump and chase offense, rather than carrying that burden on his own, because the handling, the feet just lack that skill, that dynamism to make it work consistently in the USHL, let alone in the NHL. But because he has lacked those surroundings, I think he's also struggled more as a result than he would have in other surroundings in other USHL programs this season. So certainly get some benefit of the doubt for those reasons, but still a player that I have some doubts about. But that wraps up the show for us here today. I would love to hear of any of your thoughts in the comments down below. If you've watched any of these players that we looked at today, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is your impression? Where do you think they should go on draft day, and which NHL teams could benefit from drafting any of these players? And if you're watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe as always. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers here on the podcast. And for your second listen of the day, you're going to head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I look forward to catching you listening next time.